Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if your birth order, like whether you were the oldest, middle, or youngest, might have a surprising connection to who you are attracted to? Well, this new research dives deep into that very question, and it has got some fascinating twists. We're going to explore a really well-established idea in science, the birth order effect, and how recent studies are making us rethink what we thought we knew. You see, for a long time, research pointed to a pretty specific connection. The more older brothers a guy had, the more likely he was to be gay. It seemed pretty straightforward, almost like a biological rule. This idea is based on something called the maternal immune hypothesis. The thinking goes something like this. During pregnancy, cells from a male fetus might enter the mother's bloodstream. These cells have something called Y chromosome-linked proteins. The mother's immune system might develop antibodies against these male-specific proteins. Then, in later pregnancies with male fetuses, these antibodies could cross the placenta and affect the developing brain, potentially influencing sexual orientation. Think of it like the mother's body getting primed by her sons. For years, this hypothesis seemed to fit the data perfectly, especially concerning men. Studies showed that the more older brothers a man had, the higher the odds of him being gay. Older sisters, on the other hand, didn't seem to influence a man's sexual orientation, and importantly, this effect was thought to be limited to men only, not impacting women's sexual orientation at all. There was even a study in 2018 that looked for specific antibodies, called anti-NLGN4Y antibodies. In mother's blood, they found higher levels of these antibodies in the mothers of homosexual men compared to mothers of heterosexual men. This study was seen as a big win for the maternal immune hypothesis, giving it some biological backing. But science, as you know, is always evolving. And recently, some really big new studies have started to challenge the men-only aspect of the birth order effect. One particularly massive study looked at over 9 million people, and their findings were pretty eye-opening. This new research used a more advanced statistical method, which is like a more precise calculator for analyzing these kinds of relationships. And what did they find? They found that the birth order effect wasn't just for men. It seems to affect women too. They discovered that older sisters increased the odds of homosexuality in later-born children. And older brothers also played a role, and an even bigger one than older sisters. This was a significant shift. Since that big study, other research has followed up. Some studies have confirmed that older sisters can influence the sexual orientation of later-born boys, and that older brothers can influence the sexual orientation of later-born girls. Some even found that older sisters can influence the sexual orientation of later-born girls. It is like the picture is becoming much more complex than we initially thought. Now, this is where things get really interesting. If the effect isn't just older brothers on younger brothers, but also involves older sisters impacting both boys and girls, how does that change our understanding? The original maternal immune hypothesis, which focused on male-specific antigens, needs some serious rethinking. The author of this paper, Blanchard, starts by saying that even with these new findings, a maternal immune response of some kind still seems like the most likely explanation for the birth order effect. Why? Well, purely genetic things don't usually show birth order effects. Your genes are kind of a lottery from your parents, and birth order doesn't really change that lottery. But a birth order effect suggests something changes with each pregnancy, and the immune system is designed to remember past events. So, let's tackle these new findings one by one. First, what about older sisters increasing the odds of homosexuality in later-born boys? The paper proposes an interesting idea. Maybe older sisters are acting as a kind of proxy for something else. The theory is that women who have more children might also have had more miscarriages. And if miscarried male fetuses are more common than miscarried female fetuses, then having more older sisters could statistically mean a higher chance that their mother was exposed to male specific antigens through earlier pregnancies that didn't result in a live birth. So it is not the sisters themselves, but what they represent in terms of a mother's pregnancy history. To test this, they suggest looking at antibody levels in women who've never been pregnant versus women who've only had daughters. If antibody levels are higher in the latter group, it would support this proxy idea. They also did a fun thought experiment with AI chatbots, asking them how many male fetuses a mother with no sons but with a certain number of daughters might have miscarried. The answer was, surprisingly, a number equal to the number of daughters, which highlights how many potential exposures there could be. However, the paper also notes that if the effect of older sisters is as strong as the effect of older brothers, then this proxy explanation might not be enough, and we might need to consider other reasons why sisters could have an effect. Now, let's move on to the even more complex finding: older brothers increasing the odds of homosexuality in later-born girls. This is where the maternal immune hypothesis really needs to stretch. Females don't have Y chromosomes, so they don't have the NLGN4Y protein mentioned earlier. How could antibodies to a male protein affect a female brain? The paper proposes a modified hypothesis that focuses on something called neuroinflammation. Neuroinflammation is like an inflammatory response happening within the brain. Animal studies have shown that even general inflammation introduced during pregnancy can affect how the brain develops its sex-typical characteristics, leading to unexpected brain and behavior patterns in offspring. So, the idea is that maternal antibodies triggered by any fetal antigen, whether it is sex-linked or from regular chromosomes, could cause this neuroinflammation, this inflammation. In turn, could then influence the sexual development of the brain in both male and female fetuses, potentially leading to different sexual orientations. This revised idea has a bonus. It turns out that the specific protein NLGN4Y might be hidden on the surface of brain cells, making it harder for maternal antibodies to reach it. This is a problem for the original hypothesis where antibodies directly block the protein. But with the neuroinflammation idea, the presence of antibodies of any kind could trigger the inflammatory response even if they don't directly interact with the target antigen. One lingering question is why these effects seem to be found less consistently in female samples compared to male samples. The researchers suggest that females might be less susceptible to these kinds of inflammatory conditions, meaning a smaller percentage of homosexual women might have acquired their sexual orientation through this birth order mechanism, with genetics or other factors playing a larger role. So, what is the big takeaway from all of this complex research? Well, primarily that the birth order effect on sexual orientation is likely more widespread and complicated than we once believed. It is not just about older brothers and gay men anymore. It seems to involve sisters too, and it appears to affect women's sexual orientation as well. The maternal immune hypothesis, while needing significant updates, still holds as a plausible framework. The shift towards considering broader immune responses and neuroinflammation opens up new avenues for research. It is a great example of how science progresses, building on existing knowledge but constantly revising and expanding our understanding as new evidence emerges. This research really highlights how intricate human development is. It is not just one single factor, but a complex interplay of genetics, environment, and yes, even the subtle biological processes happening between a mother and her developing babies over multiple pregnancies. The strengths of this paper are its thorough review of recent findings and its thoughtful proposals for modifying the leading hypothesis. It acknowledges the complexity and the need for further research. A limitation, as the author points out, is that many of these new findings are based on large epidemiological data and advanced statistical modeling. Direct biological evidence, like the antibody studies, needs to catch up to truly confirm these expanded theories, especially for the effects on women. Future research could focus on designing those serological studies mentioned, looking at antibody levels in women with different birth histories and offspring. Investigating neuroinflammation markers during pregnancy and their correlation with offspring sexual orientation would also be crucial. And of course, replication of these findings across diverse populations will be key to solidifying this understanding. What do you all think about these findings? Does the idea of older sisters as a proxy or the neuroinflammation theory make sense to you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this breakdown helpful, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more dives into fascinating psychology research. We'll see you in the next one.